Nobody gave me more nightmares than this thing. The Dahaka was scary as hell, but what's more terrifying than this big hunk of scary darkness? Well, the lore of this game branching out more than it should. 4 in fact, yes, 4 timelines, different princes, and a dozen or something games. And as much as I, and probably 99.9% of players, leaving the 0.01 to those weirdos over there, were drawn into the Prince of Persia from the Sands of Time saga. That's just one timeline though. The others, well, they start with games that can literally run on your calculator, and end with a Metroidvania style adventure that feels like someone took the original and went, yeah, let's make it confusing on purpose. The weird thing is, it never really lines up, but each game does its own thing, twisting the formula nonchalantly. Now we're going to start off with the original Prince. The whole franchise kicks off with Jordan Mechner's original platformer, the one where you can beat in under 2 hours if you're some demon speedrunner. The story's simple, nothing wild, but you know, it works. You've got this evil vizier, Jafar, and no, not the Aladdin one, throwing the Sultan's daughter under some dramatic countdown spell. Look at the way he throws his hands in the air. Damn, boy! Now, sorry. She's basically told, marry me or, well, perish. And if you don't marry me, there's going to be a giant hourglass here that slowly drains just to stress you out. And yeah, if it runs out, then you're dead. What a cheeky little shit. Her only hope? Well, the Prince of Persia, who is of course locked up in Jafar's dungeon, because why would he not be? So the prince has to hack his way through 12 levels that get more and more ridiculous, dodging traps, falling off ledges, and fighting whatever the hell that is. Eventually, he pokes Jafar with a sharp thing, he falls to his death and saves the princess, and boom, happily ever after. Easy to explain. Not the easiest game, but the easiest storyline for sure. Now, Prince of Persia 2, The Shadow of the Flame, 1992. So this one picks up literally 11 days after the first game, and the man doesn't even get a honeymoon before chaos kicks his door in. The prince and princess are newlywed and happy. Suddenly, the prince just turns into a random beggar and gets booted out of the kingdom. No explanation, no warning, just off you go, mate. Meanwhile, some doppelganger version of him shows up, steals his identity, and throws the princess under another countdown to death curse. How sad. Now this time, it's a tree slowly dying. Similar to every grain falling in the hourglass, every leaf that falls counts down towards her death. And of course, Jafar's back, because apparently getting dusted off in the first game wasn't enough for him. Somehow he survives, pulls the strings on everything, and now the prince has to deal with flying skulls, flying carpets, magic horses, basically everything except his actual normal life. And he has to fight his own doppelganger, but with swords. So once he sorts all of that out, he finds the princess, saves her again, and sprinkles Jafar's ashes into the wind. Job done. The game ends with this creepy old witch looking like woman. And who is that woman, you may ask? I don't know, because apparently they just left this cliffhanger to hang and completely ignored it. Now, the Prince of Persia 3D. So this is where the prince gains a bicep here and there as we step into the 3D realm. We follow the newlyweds on a little getaway to visit the Sultan's brother, Hassan. Except Hassan clearly didn't read the itinerary because he just chucks the prince straight into a jail cell like it's nothing. Uncle-in-law apparently, whatever that means. Turns out he's been holding on to this weird childhood vow that their kids must marry each other. Romantic? No. Creepy? No, I mean, yes, especially when you meet Hassan's son, Ragnar, who is half human and half tiger. Now, suddenly, the vow sounds more or less like tradition and more like a threat, and honestly, how is this not explained? No one in the kingdom is even a little freaked out by this super unnatural tiger thing, like wandering around? Is it just me? Yeah, maybe it is, never mind. Now the prince escapes, because of course he does, and only to find his father-in-law begging him to divorce his daughter. Imagine coming back from holiday and your wife's dad is like, yeah mate, pack your bags. Then during some dramatic assassination attempt, Hassan somehow manages to kill his own brother, the Sultan, by accident. And from there, it's pure chaos. Ragnar kidnaps the princess, gets rejected, and immediately it tries to kill her because apparently nobody taught this man how to deal with a heartbreak. The prince shows up just in time, scraps Ragnar inside his mechanical tiger lair thing, and escapes the princess on a giant wild horse. And then, well, that's it, timeline's over. First big reboot, no one mentions Ragnar the Tiger Man ever again. Probably for the best, to be honest. The Sands of Time. This whole continuity is basically a clean slate. Fresh timeline, fresh prince, fresh everything. The prince and his dad are on their way to visit the Sultan of Ad, but first they raid some walled Indian city. During their siege, this dodgy vizier shows them a secret treasure vault. The prince, desperate to impress his daddy, sprints ahead and finds the Dagger of Time, which he proudly hands over like a kid showing off a new toy. They head back to Ad with all their loot, animals, prisoners, and, because why not, a massive glowing hourglass. The vizier convinces the prince to stab the hourglass with the dagger because of course he does, and then bang, the Sands of Time explodes out and turns basically everyone into sand monsters. Only 3 people survive, the prince, the vizier, and a mysterious woman named Farah. The prince and Farah escape and team up, even though neither trust each other. As they climb through creepy towers and deadly tombs, they accidentally start catching feelings. Meanwhile, the prince keeps having visions of Farah nicking the dagger, so paranoia sets in real quick. When they finally reach the hourglass, the prince hesitates and the vizier swoops in for a cheap shot, and in the chaos that follows, Farah opens up about her childhood, softens the vibe, and eventually the two of them end up having a, let's call it a very emotional night together. The prince wakes up alone, the dagger's gone, and it turns out that the visions were absolutely correct. Farah did in fact steal it. He chases her back to the hourglass, but sand creatures swarm them and they fall from the tower. Farah actually sacrifices herself so the prince can survive. Heartbroken, the prince shoves the dagger into the hourglass and rewinds time all the way back to the beginning. He's the only one who remembers everything that technically never happened. He sneaks into Farah's chambers in her city and tells her the whole story. And here's the twist. That narration we've been hearing this entire game, that was him telling this version of Farah everything. The vizier tries his little ambush again. This time the prince takes him out instantly. He almost kisses Farah. Almost. He gets rejected and does what any sane person would do and rewinds time before it happens, hands her the dagger, and then walks away. Right before leaving, he repeats the childhood story Farah told him, one she technically never told this version of him. It's the only proof he has, and somehow that's enough to make her believe a man who just time traveled through trauma just for her. Between the Sands of Time and Warrior Within, the prince just disappears for 7 years, and nobody knows why. The Forgotten Sands tries to fill that gap, except Ubisoft, in true chaotic fashion, decide one version wasn't enough. Nope. 4 separate versions, all different, all weird, but you can pick your poison. Now, in the console and PC versions, which are actually canon, the prince heads off to train with his brother Malik. You know, like trying to learn leadership skills or, I don't know. All of a sudden, the fortress goes under siege as Malik releases Solomon's undead army. The prince, obviously, is probably like, maybe don't, but, you know, Malik ignores him. Chaos happens, and the seal that kept the army in prison gets split, and suddenly everyone's having a really bad day. Then, a mystical queen jinn named Razia shows up and explains that the army is actually controlled by an evil jinn called Ratash, who wants to destroy humanity. Only by reuniting the seal halves he can be stopped. Malik keeps getting corrupted by the seal's power, but somehow the prince stays magically fine. Malik kills Ratash, which would be great if Ratash didn't immediately possess Malik. Razia then drops the bomb. The only way to end this mess is for the prince to kill his own brother. So she literally possesses his sword and he fights Malik. He wins, of course, but he has to cradle Malik's dead body like some tragic Disney prince. Now, in the Wii version, the prince actually teams up with another jinn to save a kingdom from a giant. In the PSP version, the prince hunts a fire spirit, and the DS version, the prince has amnesia, gets kidnapped by a cult, and has to stop them from abusing some magic power. Now, the battles of Prince of Persia in 2009 is a turn-based tactics spin-off that nobody actually asked for, but somehow exists. And the reason it exists, well, it's to explain why the prince suddenly becomes some grumpy, aggressive sword guy in Warrior Within. Here, the prince actually gets sucked into an endless war between Persia, India, and some fictitious nation called Arisol. Because nothing ever goes smoothly, because he's haunted by the Dahaka. Now, the prince dodges death over and over again, fighting between armies and all this magic and blah 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 blah. And after all this running, fighting, and chaos, it slowly turns him into an emotionally scarred anti-hero who we meet in Warrior Within. Basically, by the end of this game, he had enough of friendship, sunlight, and probably sand too. He's now being relentlessly chased by the Dahaka, who's basically Fate's personal hitman, and he's desperate to run for his life across seas. A wise guy pops up and goes, hey, there's an island of time, the birthplace of the sands, maybe you can go and hide there. Naturally, his ship gets obliterated by a mysterious woman named Shadi, which in Persian actually means monkey, who's apparently working for some empress of time. He survives by washing up on an island like a very dramatic corpse. While chasing Shadi through crumbling ruins, he stumbles through a portal back to when the island was flourishing. Here he meets Kailina, the empress herself, duking it out with Shadi. Now also running around is this sand monster, the sand wraith, who has zero chill. When it meets the Dahaka, it actually dies, but that becomes really important to the story later on. The prince makes his way to the center of the island where he meets Kailina, trying to save her own ass. They both fight, but of course our hero wins. He realizes that it does nothing to stop Mr. Scary from chasing his backside. Surprise, surprise, he then also realizes that the Emperor's death is what actually creates the sands of time in the first place. Yes, he's caught in a time paradox. His own actions literally set up the very problems he's trying to fix. Ridiculous? Well, yeah. He finds an artifact called the Mask of the Wraith, and his plan, well, is to travel to the present, drag the Empress and the Sands out of their timeline, and erase the events of the first game. Bold, audacious, but nothing's off the table for the Prince of Persia series. But we knew that. The mask transforms him into a sand wraith, creating a loophole where there's a sandy prince and the real one in the same present day. So instead of the past, where the sand wraith, which we know is Prince now, to get sucked by the scary thing, he sets up his normal self to die, making him return to normality, which seals the loop. Now, he takes his place in the present timeline, re-witnessing all the stuff that he witnessed before, and after Shadi is defeated by Kailina, they return to the center of the island, But she's still skeptical that the prince can return the timeline to normal. They fight, but this time the Dahaka comes and third parties. However, there are two different endings here. Now, the non-canonical ending, without the water sword, the prince kills Kylina, which creates the sands in the present and erases the sands of time. The Dahaka absorbs all of the energy and poofs. He ends up back at Babylon, discovering the city is on fire and Farah is held hostage. Fun, fun, fun. Now, the canonical ending with the water sword, the prince actually manages to defeat the Dahaka and saves Kylina. They escape together by boat, bond a little, and arrive in Babylon, only to find the city burning. Alright, the final chapter of the Sands of Time quadrilogy. The prince and Kylina arrive in Babylon, expecting maybe a quiet day, a cup of tea, and maybe something normal. But no, the timeline's an absolute mess. Because the sands were never discovered by the vizier in the past, the events of the Sands of Time got rewritten, but the vizier still exists, somehow even worse than before. The prince and Kylina wash ashore, and things go immediately wrong. Kylina is dragged away and the prince has to chase after her. He finally catches up and he witnesses the vizier, yes, the little troublemaker, murder Kylina with a dagger of time. Her death releases the sands across Babylon again, causing corruption to spread everywhere. Then the vizier, because he can't just stop with one bad decision, stabs himself with the dagger. This transforms him into some hideous, thing. And amidst all of that chaos, the sands actually attacks the prince's arm too, causing him to get infected. And as the building collapses around him, the prince dives for the dagger of time, grabbing it as a last form of hope. Now, meet the Dark Prince, basically his narcissistic shadow side. The Sands of Time slowly eats at the prince, giving the prince a split personality. The Dark Prince actually offers the prince some crazy powers and whips, basically, and he actually saves him here and there while trying to take over him. He eventually bumps into Pharaoh, who has zero memory of him because the timelines are messy at this point, and they're cruel. Still, they form a new awkward sweet bond, and the Dark Prince appears. Pharaoh freaks out and runs because he's scary, no? Pharaoh and the prince actually meet up again, but Pharaoh is caught in a trap by the vizier and the prince is chucked down a hole. And while the prince is in this hole, the Dark Prince takes over him. He eventually finds the corpse of his father, which causes him to snap. Picking up his father's sword, he makes amends with the Dark Prince and heads off to find the vizier. In the final battle, the prince uses the dagger of time to finally take the vizier down. The sand gets released again and Kylina literally reforms to magic dust. A cool aerial 360 shot, and then bam. Kylina basically goes, your journey's done, and then leaves, but the prince still has to fight his inner demon in a final mind battle because, yeah, Farah's voice guides him, he wins, and insanity is restored. Now, in the sickest thing ever, at the end, he explains to Farah how he knows her, and then the whole Sands of Time narrative loops back for one last messy, beautiful closure. Ugh, beautiful. Now, the third timeline. Complete reset, new world, new prince. Maybe not even royalty, just the prince, because, titles are confusing. Anyway, the world's a mess thanks to an ancient fight between Ahriman, who's basically evil, and Ormaz, the god of light. Ormaz wins and traps Ahriman in a giant magic tree called the Tree of Life. And no, not that thing. Ormaz traps Ahriman for what seems like eternity, but as eternity runs out, basically, Ahriman is now at risk of escaping. The prince starts by chasing a donkey, or maybe someone named Farah? Oh, wait, no, scratch that. He actually finds Elika, who's running from soldiers. They head to the Tree of Life, but Elika's dad, the Morning King, shows up and releases Ahriman. Instant apocalypse, and Persia basically goes from zero to wasteland real quick. They traipse across 4 zones, grabbing light orbs and fighting Ahriman's lieutenants, the Hunter, the Alchemist, the Warrior, and the Concubine, all with tragic backstories that Elika tells while you dodge spikes and monsters. The revelation is actually that Elika's not alive, and she's an undead light being resurrected by Ahriman. Chaos ensues, and Elika sacrifices herself, and Ahriman gets sealed. The prince can't handle losing her, so he destroys all of the purified regions and the Tree of Life, bringing her back to life. Now, with Elika's revived corpse, Ahriman's forces wreck everything, causing Persia to crumble instantly. However, in the DLC literally named The Epilogue, Elika is mad, and rightly so. She slaps the prince and then leaves, leaving the prince to actually deal with Ahriman himself. However, we do get some closure in The Prince of Persia: The Fallen King, the DS spin-off to close this branch. The prince tries to fix his mistake by summoning Ormaz's light. He fights Ahriman's corruption with Zal, who dies heroically, and the game ends on a hopeful note with a mysterious ancestor promising that one day the prince will be able to beat his inner demons. Now, in The Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, the 4th timeline, Sargon, a warrior of the immortals, travels through a time-broken ruins of Mount Kaf to rescue Prince Hassan, who's actually the prince that you're trying to save, which means you play as someone who's not a prince, but actually might be a prince secretly A prophecy reveals three princes: Varum, Darius' son, Hassan, Thomas' puppet, and Sargon himself, secretly the queen's third swap son. Now, Varum seeks to claim the throne using divine power. Across Tangled timelines, Sargon tries to stop him, learning that his true purpose is to save Varum. With the Smirra's help, Sargon rescues the universe, lifts the curse on Mount Kaf, and brings Varum back from his vengeful path. In the end, Hassan rejects the throne, Sargon refuses his hidden birthright, and both walk away from Persia's royal schemes. Varum gets a second chance in a new life, and Sargon leaves to pursue his own future. And one immortal, Rajdin, is never seen again, likely killed off screen or cut from the game.